Welcome to another exciting episode of the NIDS View, a weekly show of the National Institute for Deterrence Studies, where we are advancing peace, promoting stability, and helping you to think deterrence. Each week we will discuss and analyze a recent topic and provide insight to how it affects our national deterrence. The view of the hosts and guests are their own. We hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome to another engaging edition of the NIDS View, the weekly program of the National Institute for Deterrence Studies, where we advance peace, promote stability, and help you to think deterrence. And today, Curtis and I are going to do our monthly close look at the key developments in the national security landscape news, breaking down some of the headlines, examining how they influence the U.S. deterrence strategies, because that's what we do. And if you're on the YouTube podcast, you may notice that Curtis and I are buckled down for this January freeze as things happen in our area. Curtis didn't lose any power, thank goodness, down in Tennessee. And we're hitting a high of about 11 today. So enough about the news about the weather. So as always, the views are expressed are our own. And we didn't even get together. I think, Curtis, you got to tell the audience, did we even show prep to each other, or just going to be completely off the cuff?
No, this is, for our audience, this is no prep episode where we do our end of the month news roundup, where we try to find articles that we think are interesting. Some may be big. Most are usually obscured by the other big news, but are still important to this arena of ideas. And I think this is still my favorite theme of our podcast, is when we do the news roundup.
Yeah, and we do this once a month. So if you're a new listener, we do it once a month. We sort of do this off the cuff. You hear Curtis and I, and as always, you can give us feedback either at our YouTube site, where we'll interact with you, or even at thinkdeterrence.com. We're glad to interact with you, find out what you think, and even sort of go back and forth with you a little bit too. And so our goal, though, still remains constant: to bring clarity, insight, thoughtful analysis to the events that are defining today's strategic environment, and as always, to get you to think deterrence. And so without any further ado, Curtis, because we always run out of time on this segment, I'm going to turn it over to you to bring in your first news article.
All right, first article. This is a biggie, but you can't talk about January 2026 without the release of the Trump administration's national defense strategy. Came out on January 26th, somewhere within that time frame, and it was, of course, I think it came out to kind of a surprise. It sort of surprised me when it popped out.
Yeah, it was sort of different timing, I think, from previously.
Well, so so what does this do? So what does the National Defense Strategy do? Well, it sort of provides the military's portion of the national security strategy, which, of course, Jim, you remember, came out in November of 2025, and I think we did a podcast on that. Already.
I don't remember it, but I'm 63 years old.
Okay, fair enough. So basically, the National Defense Strategy sort of tells Congress and America and all of our allies and friends and foes alike, if you will, what our defense strategy priorities are going to be moving forward to ensure or actionize the national security strategy. And this thing was really based. This came from an article by Miles Jamieson on. Where was that article? On executivegovernment.com. And basically he says that the NDS has four priorities. All right. Defend the homeland, deter China in the Indo-Pacific through strength, not confrontation, increase burden sharing with allies and partners. And the fourth one is to supercharge the U.S. defense industrial base. And so sort of weaving these things together, basically what we're trying to do is deter China without going to war. I think this was the Biden administration's mission set as well. Obviously, defend the homeland, and I'm going to talk about that just a tad bit more here. Much of the controversy of the Trump administration has been its desire to increase burden sharing on allies. Whether you're Australia, Japan, or a NATO country, someone has had some beef about being asked to carry more of the financial and military burden of their own security. And for some reason, that is just something for non-Americans to be super upset about. And I'm just can't figure out why. And of course, rebuilding and modernizing the defense industrial base. And another term what they use is reshoring. Reshoring production, Jim, as opposed to offshoring production, right? So reshoring is bringing that stuff back. Everything from making our own bandages to making our own steel and everything in between, is important to the ability to wage war. If you have the ability to mobilize and wage war, then the idea is that you can deter it, right? Because people don't want to take you on if you've got an industrial base. World War II was won as much by America's industrial might as it was by the American GI going out and either landing on D-Day or fighting or conducting island hopping campaigns through the Pacific. And so, Rosie the Riveter and all of these other abilities to mobilize the entire country's industrial base, companies that were building jukeboxes and radios, because in those days we didn't have TV. It was a radio that was the central form of entertainment.
I still have a jukebox.
Yeah. Well, they started building rifles and, and things like that. They sort of retooled themselves. So this is sort of, we need to get to a point where we can actually utilize a healthy industrial base. And if you're going to have a larger military. And then the one thing I want to add to this that is not in there for our listeners. So in that sort of quick rundown is when you look at the National Defense Strategy on page 3, under the Defend the U.S. Homeland, priority 1, for lack of a better description, it notes that we will maintain a robust and modern nuclear deterrent capable of addressing the strategic threats of our country, quote unquote. That's the extent of the National Defense Strategy's discussion on nuclear weapons and deterrence. I'll tell you, Jim, it's a 35 page document written over 7 months. What's that math? 5 pages a month it took to write this thing? Come on. Couldn't we have done a little bit better or maybe a little more detail? Yeah.
No, I agree. When I saw it come out, I had a couple of reactions to it. My first was I was happy there's at least specificity of what's there, and I think it's important. A lot of comments come back from the way the administration is, and it's no big secret. There's there's a lot of things that seem to be on the fly, whether they're on the fly or not. But some people have a difficulty pinning down where the administration's going in many places because they think they're going one direction because they don't listen closely. And so the details in these strategy documents and having these strategy documents is very important because the commander's intent, if you will, really gets out there. And I think that's important for these documents to be there and that specificity. And like you, I was really surprised there wasn't much more in the nuclear side of it. And it was, a little bit, I think it was a lot more terse than previous ones. I'm not as in the know as you are, but it was stronger, which I think we need to be. And I think it follows the administration. I want to focus on one thing I always like to hear about, and this bringing back the industrial base, because not just the industrial base, it's all the thought that goes into all the equipment that works with and for our military. And so I'm going to coin a phrase on this podcast. I want everyone to accredit it to me. And that is, to reshore is to ensure. We want to ensure that we have the ability to speed up our systems in case of war and ensure we have the capabilities necessary for our own survivability and ensure that our best interests are kept in those pieces of very delicate and very complex pieces of equipment. So came from Jim Petrosky here at the National Institute for Deterrence Studies. To reshore is to ensure. And I just wanted one other context of that, and I've mentioned in this podcast before. I've been watching a lot of old historical films. What people may not know is during at the beginning of World War II, when the United States was not involved in the war, there was I think it was Truman who put together a really interesting strategy when England had been running out of equipment early on in the war. We loaned them equipment, and we just said, well, we'll pay us back when things are later on. I forget what it was called. I don't think it was a Lend-Lease. It might have been, but we loaned that. But what it really did is it gave the United States an already on purpose, design developed industrial base. So when we did get into the war, everything was already running. Yeah. Because we had already built equipment for someone else, and we just kept on rolling. And that helped us a lot to keep a jump start early on in the war. And so, again, deterrence is about not having the war, but you don't have deterrence unless you show you're ready to go to war. Now, I have a paper I'm writing on that. I'm not going to give away the name now. Keep a watch out for Global Security Review to see that paper come out. And you can send comments to me. So there you go. So anything else, Curtis?
Nope, that's it. You're up.
Okay. Well, and I even got to give my own little plug for myself. Wow. Hey, that's pretty good. Yeah. So I was looking at an article, and it was actually in the USA Today by Davis Winke. It was on January 6th of 2026. And the title of the article was, "Is it too late to rethink U.S. nuclear strategy? Experts review options." And I thought this was an excellent article, especially for someone like me. I often say it unapologetically, but I still say it, is that I'm a scientist. And so I like to look at all things on the table and weigh them out. And then, make my decisions from that, because sometimes you'll miss something if you don't look at an opposing view, which often people don't do. And in this article, again, written by Davis Winke, is that Winke, is it? Yeah, I want to just make sure I said that right. It didn't sound right. That's his name. Anyway, they ask a bunch of several nuclear strategic experts on it. One of it was one of our very own Bob Peters was part of this from the Heritage Foundation. Yeah. And they talked primarily about the ICBMs, the Sentinel system. And they said, well, what's happening with the Arms Control Association looking at, various ways in which should we maintain our 400 intercontinental ballistic missiles? Is that enough? Is this not enough? And they basically looked at that and questioned, what do we need? And what is most interesting in this article is they evaluate this is the comment that, well, there's a mandate for at least 400 missiles set by Congress. And they say that's arbitrary. And you know what? I agree it's arbitrary. I don't know what the number is. I mean, 400 is not an arbitrary number, but is that the right number? You only know when deterrence fails, whether it's the wrong number, and when deterrence succeeds, it was the right number. And so at least we, these concepts of throwing, whether it's arbitrary or not, only serves to, sort of give people an idea that, well, we don't really know what we're doing. Well, you know what you're doing, but you don't know the results always because the adversary gets a roll. But I will say that if we put enough fear in our adversaries with 400 missiles on the ground and give them 400 targets versus 400 cities to shoot at, it makes them at least think and stop and look at this. And so that was one. And so they get all wrapped up around numbers, but it does. One of the comments is Congress should stop requiring minimum number of missiles and instead let national security needs drive the scale of the Sentinel program. That's also an interesting statement because how long is it, Curtis, that it's going to take from a first hole in the ground until we actually have the full up 400 Sentinel system?
I don't know. I mean, this is supposed to be done by 2030. I think we're well beyond that at this point now that we have to dig new holes. The original estimate for Sentinel was that they would be able to fit into the current existing silo infrastructure, and I think there's some question as whether that's going to be able to happen. So, if you have to start digging new holes, you've just really massively expanded not only in cost but in time. And we've talked about this in past
many
podcasts.
times.
I worry less about the cost, and I'm much more concerned about the time. Because we can't build them any faster, no matter how much money we throw at the problem, or dig the holes any faster for new silos. And so we have to come up with new, better, cheaper ways to deploy them. And there's a number of folks out there who are really thinking about this now. And the idea in the 2023 Strategic Posture Commission proposed the idea of considering mobile ICBM systems, which, by the way, our adversaries do as
Already
well
have.
against us. Yeah, so the technology is mature, and the fact that we don't do that could be judged as arbitrary. So, let's understand where we are. One man's arbitrary is another man's TLAR.
Curtis, are you reading my screen notes from my computer?
Oh, no.
I think you've been bugging.
Totally unscripted.
Totally unscripted. Because that's where I was going with this. So what was interesting in this article is they talk about the Sentinel system as though it's the only thing we have and the only options that are available in this article. And I think that's often the problem when you look at a problem like this. It's not the only thing. They say, there's one comment in the article, I can't find it right now, about, the bombers can pick it up. Well, only way the bombers can pick up a lot of this, we get them on deployment, get them into the air, and have them more available than they are now, which is not discussed here. But then, of course, our own Bob Peters, thank you, Bob, mentions that putting Sentinel missiles on the launcher trucks would give us the ability to flex this, because if we are going to, go back to the comment, if we are going to stop requiring minimum number of missiles and instead let national security needs drive the scale of the Sentinel program, well, national security needs in 2026 now. Wow, I almost said 2024, 2025. I'm really behind. 2026 is different probably than what's going to be in 2028. You can't get the holes in the ground fast enough. As you say, timing is important. But if you had mobile launchers, you can increase and decrease those fairly quickly, and be able to, basically look at your national security needs today and adjust for tomorrow in a much faster vein. And so that was the piece that I took away from this. So the two pieces, I give to our audience. If you haven't seen it, again, it was in the USA Today. It's a typical, kind of a puff piece for the general public, but it leads people to believe that there's only one component to the strategy. And although it gives you 3 different expert review opinions, and you can take a look at all of them, everything from let's just get rid of them to let's look at mobile launchers to is 400 the right number, those kind of questions. There's good questions to ask, but the real question is what all goes together to deter the adversary. It's not just one option. Not just one option. It's the Curtis McGiffin whack-a-mole theory, where you give them enough things to go after and are afraid to do anything because what's coming later may not be what you wanted. There you go, Curtis. Any more comment?
No comment. I'm going to move
wow.
on to Article 3 here.
That's all you want to do is do your articles. Go ahead.
I want to get
Curtis.
to the next article. That's a great one you had there, brother. I hadn't seen that one. Okay, so this one is from the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, sort of an arms, a disarmament
are you a member,
organization.
Curtis?
I'm not a member. I'm not a member. And this piece came out on January 27th, 2026 by John Mecklin on their website. This article has been repeated and republished in numerous news sites, so you might see a different version of this. But basically, the title is, it is now 85 seconds to midnight as the 2026 Doomsday Clock, has been reset, right? So
we better speed up this podcast because
we're now 85 seconds away from destruction of the world. And I just wanted to review quite quickly here what they say, and then maybe just quickly go over just sort of the history of this. But basically, they go on to say that Russia, China, and the United States and other major countries have become increasingly aggressive, adversarial and nationalistic, and global competition, risks of nuclear war, climate change, misuse of biotechnology, and the potential threat of artificial intelligence and other apocalyptic dangers are sort of leading to this judgment that they are now that we are now 85 seconds away. This may be the closest to destruction that I think we've been, even in some of the worst of times in our history. So we'll look at that here in a moment. They said, meanwhile, competition among major powers has become a full-blown arms race, as evidenced by the increasing numbers of nuclear warheads and platforms in China, and the modernization of delivery systems in the United States, Russia, and China. So, again, we jump to this arms race assumption, right? So they say we're in a full-blown arms race. I don't know that we, the United States, are participating in an arms race. The current modernization program of record that we were just talking about in the previous article does not add any new warheads. It does not add any new missiles. And in fact, it builds 2 fewer submarines. And so this idea that we are somehow arms racing, the dirty little secret here is that we are not arms racing, and we should be.
Yeah.
Because the adversary is racing. They are moving forward, and they are not only modernizing, but they are adding systems to such a degree that it is becoming what I would refer to as an overwhelming threat. So this is interesting. They also throw in Golden Dome, the New START treaty expiring in a couple of in early February, Jim. I didn't know if you knew that or not. And the threatened resumption of explosive nuclear testing as all being reasons to add into this idea that we are only 85 seconds away from destruction, right? And so they come up with 3 arguments here as to how we can pull back from the brink, right? So the first one is that the United States and Russia can resume dialogue about limiting their nuclear arsenals. Funny, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists don't mention China in this argument, while they mention China as part of the problem, but they're not part of the solution. So that's odd. Again, Russia has Russia been, fully following the New START treaty here for the last few years, the treaty they signed in 2010?
Well, I might answer that, or I might not, given that I have another article to review.
Okay. All right. So the bottom line here is
computer, my friend.
They're not engaged in this, right? And so the next one is to avoid destabilizing investments in missile defense. So here's the hit on Golden Dome, right? This is to say that, well, if we buy Golden Dome, we're going to make it worse. And then, of course, to continue the existing moratorium on explosive nuclear testing. The U.S. has done that. It is the adversaries that have not. And once again, there's always a point towards the U.S. over the rest of the world. Finally, they call for a repudiation of President Trump's war on renewable energy and a rapid reduction of the use of fossil fuels. So that's that same old noise and nonsense. And then meaningful guidelines regarding the incorporation of artificial intelligence in their militaries. Even if they agreed to guidelines, how would you know if they're ever following it? So these are the sorts of things that we see here. So what's interesting what I'd like to point out to some of our listeners here who might be interested is, well, how has the Bulletin's clock played out over the years, right? So in 1947, Jim, the clock was set at 7 minutes. Okay.
47?
Yeah. In 47, by 53, it went down to 2 minutes. So it's at 120 seconds, right?
Yeah.
Why do you think in 53 it went down to 2 minutes?
No idea, Curtis.
The H-bomb, right? The hydrogen bomb was
not
introduced.
Really. Well, yeah. Well, look at all the wars that started because of that.
Sure. In 63, though, by 1963, the clock was back up to 12 minutes, despite having survived the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yes.
In 68, it was down to 7 minutes, but in 69, it was back up to 10 minutes. 68 and 69 were basically the height of the Cold War, and when the Soviet Union surpassed us and achieved superiority in its missile forces and in other capabilities, yet we were 7 to 10 minutes away. Okay. Note that the 60s was, of course, a Democrat president, a Democratic administration through the 60s. Of course, by 69, Nixon had taken office, but they were still awarding 10 minutes. Now let's fast forward to 1980. President Carter is still in office, and the number is back down to 7 minutes. But the very next year, 1981, Reagan takes office, and the clock moves to 4 minutes. Okay? We weren't any closer to war, but we had changed presidents back to a Republican, right? And then, of course, in 84, that number dropped down to 3 minutes. This was, of course, after the Evil Empire speech, the SDI speech, and Abel Archer, and a lot of other things that occurred in the 83 timeline. Of course, 1991, Jim. 17 minutes, right? Yeah. The collapse of the Soviet Union. We see a massive amount of disarmament going on.
Peace broke out everywhere.
Peace is breaking out everywhere. Cats and dogs sleeping together. It was crazy. By 2002, though, the number had dropped back down to 7 minutes. And then in 2010, after the signing of the New START, we were only down to 6 minutes. New START, this is a treaty negotiated by President Obama, who espoused a world without nuclear weapons. We could still only achieve a 1 minute. We still lost a minute, if you will, towards protecting the world. And then, of course, in 2015, that was cut in half down to 3 minutes. Well, what was significant of 2015? Well, the Crimea invasion occurred in 14, and we started seeing Russian nuclear threats. By 2017, we're down to 2.5 minutes. What happened in 2017, Jim? Trump is elected for the first time, right? 2018, we're down to 2 minutes with North Korea and testing and these sorts of things. By 2020, we're down to 100 seconds with COVID and climate change and these sorts of things. By 23, we're down to 90 seconds with Ukraine and the discovery of all these new missile silos in the Chinese deserts. And in 2025, after the Trump election, we dropped down to 89 seconds. We lose a whole second just for the election. And now today, after Trump's first year, the atomic scientists have dropped us down to 85 seconds, which I think is the shortest amount of time in its history. So I just want to note that there is some interesting ties to this. And to me, in my brain, it just doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. I would think that these numbers would be different given the historical examples that I cited them to. These numbers came off of the Bulletin's website. It's direct from them. So I just thought it would be interesting to share that. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, hats off to them for coming up with an interesting messaging technique. To be honest, the average, it's very difficult to explain, and that's why our organization exists. And we really need to amplify the message that deterrence is a complex but important way of preserving peace. And so when I say hats off, and they have a simple messaging technique, there's a clock, and it has a second hand, and you move it closer and further. So that's good. But when it comes down to scrutiny of what those numbers mean, they are, I'm going to go back to my previous article, somewhat arbitrary and somewhat focused on the political theme of the day. You would think that, first of all, I don't understand what 86 seconds means versus 7 minutes means in their odd clock methodology. There's no scale there. I'm a scientist, so show me a mathematical representation that relates it to. Is this a degree scale? Is this a linear scale? Is it an exponential scale? Like it has no meaning other than one. And here is the one that it produces. And I don't think it's the right one that we need to have. It brings about fear about things that are happening in the present. And fear that they try to allay here is somewhat arbitrary because things happen. and I'll go back to my climate change, and people that know me know, my scrutiny of the climate change folks, whether you believe there's anthropogenic climate change enhancement, or whether it's natural solar or anything else. The real question is, how are you measuring? What are you doing? How do you develop it? Where are the statistics? Where's the analysis? And then the real question is, where's the historic proof? I don't see the historic proof for the clock, and I really don't see a lot of the historic proof for the global warming as well. I mean, give me a prediction that's been, given to us about death and destruction, and it just is there to sort of enhance the fear, if you will, and an anxiety. And so I caution people to look at this. I'm glad there's some quote scientists. I'd like to see what the scientists or their background is, what kind of science they're applying. I love it when they say scientists say this, because I'm a scientist, so I'll say it. I don't like the clock. There. So scientists say that they don't like the clock. All right. Well, that's a true statement, because I'm one. And so, as Einstein said, you find one outlier, then it's not fact, right? If you can prove it, it's just proved. So anyway, I don't put a lot of faith in this, and I do find it somewhat daunting, because going back to my original comment, we lose our message because people say, oh, it's a clock. I understand that. But the difficult part is, rolling up your sleeves and understanding what does it mean when China puts holes in the ground and starts building nuclear weapons? What does it mean when we build a Sentinel system? And why is it there? Does that make us closer to nuclear war? Does that bring us closer to peace and prosperity? You can make those arguments, but people never get to hear those two sides of the argument. I'd like to see that happen. Yeah. And the clock does not help that one iota. So it becomes a red herring, in my opinion.
Well, it's clearly had a political bias to it, in the sense that the way you see the numbers move. There's no implication. Well, first of all, diluting the argument by including climate change and these sorts of things as doomsday scenarios, and the use of technology and these sorts of things. I mean, if that were true, then the numbers should have been much shorter in the 70s, when everybody was predicting that we were going to be frozen over.
We are frozen over.
And
I'm in Ohio today.
Yeah, it's frozen over up there. And so I really think that you should probably, they should probably have a doomsday clock for, nuclear war, and then maybe a doomsday clock, for climate change, if that's what they want to argue. I would argue the opposite here. The doomsday clock we've seen was inconvenient truth and other things that have now since just been disproven over time. None of those things were accurate and correct. And if it were real science, it would be correct. So, so this is the challenge, and it becomes interpretive. They might as well be doing a doomsday dance. Give me some interpretive dance to explain all of this.
Yeah, no, I would say maybe the doomsday clock should be developed as follows: that it goes backward in time and shows you where your prediction came true. And then you say the clock goes back to, your 10-year ago prediction of we're going to be at war, during the last election, we're going to be at war in 2 months. Well, let's go back to our doomsday clock and look how doomsday it really was and where we are now. And you'll find that most of the activity of every country, whether you like the administration or not, and I'm not going to pick on any specific administration, what I've felt very uncomfortable sometimes with politicians from both stripes when they say things and said, oh no, what's going to happen? And yet the clear interest of keeping us at peace has always seemed to be the monumental task that gets awarded. When it hasn't happened, in fact, in the United States, when is the last time we started a war? Aside from, as Adam would say, the war of northern aggression. That was, when did we start? When was the last time we started one?
Yeah, well, been a long time. Yeah. So, and let's keep it that way.
Yes. And
you want to get your article?
All about. Well, I don't know how much time we have. I got to look down at my clock here. Yeah, so I'm going to give a quick article, and I'm just going to do it real quickly because you mentioned New START Treaty, and sure enough, I found an article on globalsecurity.org. That is not to be confused with our magazine, our online article, Global Security Review, although we do have several articles on this. And it was Chairman Mast and Representative Self pledged to work closely with the Trump administration on modernizing arms control approach ahead of the New START treaty expiration. Well, that's very good. We need cooperation in our government to drive a path forward for what was thought to be a very valuable way in which we could keep arms control at some limitation and reduce the complexity of it, and so that's what New START was supposed to do. But what has been revealed, and I'm just going to read directly from what the lawmakers wrote. It said it is long past time, very important, to recognize that the New START treaty no longer advances meaningful nuclear arms control with the Russian Federation, nor, this is bigger, nor contributes to the broader goal of international denuclearization. That basically is, it failed. And now, what do we do about that? Well, we have to work together and emphasize that these agreements are simply ineffective without verification measures, a commitment to compliance. Compliance means that we are able to, put some teeth to what happens. This goes back to the Doomsday Clock. Whenever we put teeth to something that we know is going to maintain peace, it seems that, the Doomsday Clock backs up fear, right? Instead of saying, that's what makes the agreement work. There was no teeth to this treaty. And because there's no teeth, because we had, stopped verification, we stopped enforcing the compliance. Basically, the treaty is null and void. We're in a treaty with ourselves, So it's great that our administration, you wonder what our leadership thinks. Our leadership, and this comes from, I can't remember. They are specifically on the, I'll get to it. They'll get the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So, this comes from the House Foreign Affairs Committee. It's like they're ready to work with the administration to modernize the arms control approaches. We need modern approaches. And believe me, nuclear control, verifying, validating number of nuclear weapons and where they are and how many there are is very, very difficult process. Because there's two pieces of that, and I just want to throw that out to our audience, especially with nuclear weapons. If you want to let people know how many nuclear weapons you have, okay, us or our adversary, you want to be able to confirm there's a weapon. Because if I walk into a room with an empty box and you think it's a weapon, I can use it for leverage when I don't have it. Or if you come in and you find a box and you think it's empty, it has a weapon, that also can be used as leverage, okay? But confirming that without giving away secrets is really the hard part. And so this becomes extremely complex technical problem. And so I'm glad that they want to work on modern approaches. Aside from what was said once before during 9/11, the only way you can make sure no nuclear weapons make it in the United States is with a screwdriver, right? You open everything that comes in the United States and break it down to the smallest component. Then you can see it's not there. It's a very difficult problem, but I'm glad that we see our lawmakers are getting together. This just came out January 14th, a year into the administration, but I'm glad we are. And that's why I like this article. Comments, Curtis?
I just think that, the treaty effort has been, in my mind's eye, a failure. Mm-hmm. I think there is we've had podcasts on this before, but we're talking about there's an ecosystem. The negotiators are an ecosystem all unto themselves. They use the wrong metric of success. The metric of success for them is how many agreements do I get, right? When the real metric should be is how many agreements do I get that are good for America. And so maybe that will change now under the new leadership. Who knows? The problem here is that there are 3 rules to having a treaty be successful. You got 2 of them extremely correct, and that is, one is that you must have you must be able to verify. Right, there can't be any question about the verification, and I think that the third one is that you must. You got the second one. The third one is that you must have a symmetrical desire for the treaty. In other words, you can't want it more than they do. If you do, then they will take advantage of you. Right, you'll agree to anything just to get a win. And then, and so these are the challenges. So in the end, so the treaty has to have these three things, right? In the end, after you've signed the treaty, both sides must still be able to believe that they have met their national security needs, right? Mm-hmm. Second, they have to have an ability to verify without question and correct if there is a violation of the verification. And the third is you must want that treaty equally. If you don't, then you're going to either get into a bad agreement or they're going to cheat. Any one of these, if they're not interested in complying, they'll cheat. And I guess there's a sort of an honorary mention or a fourth, and that is that you must acknowledge that treaties are a product of the rules-based international order. And if you're dealing with an adversary you're asking them to sign a treaty that's envisioned by a rules-based international order that they fundamentally reject and want to change, I kind of don't understand where you think that they're going to, keep their promise. And so for our adversaries over history, treaties with the United States has been nothing more about how do I gain more leverage? How do I weaken my adversary and gain more leverage at the end of this treaty? What do I give so that I can get? For Americans, it's what do I have to give up and allow them to have a little bit of a superiority in order for them to make an agreement. And so there's this willingness to be taken advantage of for the public hope of saying, I have a treaty, therefore look at how much more virtuous we are. We may not be any safer, but we look much more virtuous. And I think this is a challenge here. And I think this current administration is less interested in how they might appear on the world stage versus whether or not they are achieving real wins for America's national security.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. The treaty has to serve a purpose. Another one of my own personal comments. You can again attribute them to me, so maybe they'll all be on my tombstone when I croak. But anyway, you can't make an agreement unless everyone wins. As soon as someone's not winning in the agreement, there's not an interest for both sides. Then it's not an agreement. And then lastly, I'm going to bring because several times with Adam, he always brings in pop culture for me. That's not really good, but pop culture from the Pirates of the Caribbean, right? And if you watch that movie, there's a place in that movie where someone makes a deal with the pirate and then he does it and he cheats and he goes, wait a minute, you cheated. He says, remember, pirate. Okay. So, and that's exactly what happens here, right? That's how it works out. So anyway, Curtis, unfortunately, we've run out of time, and because of that, we're going to leave it at 2 articles each. I know you had a third article. Maybe you can write a paper or do another podcast on it with us in the future. But we're going to wrap this up. For those of you on the YouTube, you might see Curtis and I wearing our bright orange dapper NID stocking caps. It's because it's so cold out here in January. But I want to use this opportunity to thank Curtis. He actually sent these out to several NIDS members as a Christmas gift. And so I want to publicly thank you for sending such a nice gift because it definitely reminds us of our organization, but also reminds me of you and your sacrifices and interest in this organization. So this wraps up this edition of the NIDS View News and Review for January. And as always, we appreciate you joining us as we break down the stories shaping today's deterrent landscape and the issues that define tomorrow's strategic choices. This program is produced under the NIDS Podcasting Network, a division of the National Institute for Deterrence Studies, and made possible through the dedicated team and support of listeners who believe in advancing peace, promoting stability, and strengthening understanding of U.S. deterrence. And you can always find our episodes or share us at our feedback at thinkdeterrence.com or at our YouTube channel. And until next time, Curtis and I thank you for listening and remind you, as always, to think deterrence.
Thank you for listening to the NIDS View. This show is produced under the NIDS Podcasting Network, a division of the National Institute for Deterrence Studies. NIDS is a 501c3 organization dependent upon donations to provide this podcast and bring about awareness of the peacekeeping value of U.S. strength and our national deterrence. You can catch all of our podcasts or provide feedback at thinkdeterrence.com. I would like to thank our producer, Kimberly Charrington, our sponsors, and all the fantastic members of the National Institute for Deterrence Studies for making this podcast possible. Stay tuned next week for another exciting and informative The NIDS View.